You don't need me to tell you this, but in 2020, everything changed. There were the big, obvious shifts in culture and politics, and also everyone had to stay inside. I started carving spoons out of the trunk of an old apricot tree. I watched enough of Netflix's Drive to Survive to briefly convince myself that Formula One was exciting. I also joined in on the huge wave of people getting into online chess.
Check.
Check these nuts.
No. Wait, was that checkmate? What a cool move!
Yep, he moves this pawn 2.0. Let's move my pawn 2.0. Let's go. Checkmate! Look at him. He don't know what to do now.
Chess got way more popular during the pandemic. The Queen's Gambit came out in December, and hundreds of the world's most popular streamers got into the game. Within seconds, anyone could log on, usually to chess.com, and play a game against someone of their skill level. After finishing this line in the script, I played a 3-minute game against someone from Brazil. I got my ass kicked. With more people playing chess came more people watching and otherwise consuming online chess content. The idea of a chess Twitch streamer seems faintly contradictory. Chess is a slow game played by old guys with wispy beards. Twitch is for blueberry mango ice vape enthusiast teenagers. As we will see later in this saga, this new media apparatus isn't necessarily set up to handle sensitive stories with appropriate care. Welcome to Only If You Get Caught, a show about breaking the rules. I'm Patrick Redford. Our story concerns a new sort of cheating scandal involving a very new sort of player. It's a story about a game undergoing transformational change and struggling to manage it. But this isn't a story about bad players like me. It's about the best players in the world. This is a story about cheating in chess, but it's really the story of the tensions that arise when everything changes. This ridiculous saga could only have happened at the border between the old and the new. This is the story of Hans Niemann versus Magnus Carlsen. Okay, now before we get too lost in the details of this story, we're going to run through a quick game to just get everyone sort of caught up on the basic outlines. I've got our producer, Alex, here.
Hello. Okay, we're going to play cheat sheet again. So in 1 minute, you are going to tell me who cheated, who was cheated, what rule was broken, what are the stakes, and who was the arbiter. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Ready, set, go.
Okay, the person who was thought to have benefited in this scandal is Hans Niemann, a 21-year-old bad boy style chess player who allegedly cheated during an in-person game against Magnus Carlsen, the greatest player of all time, at an in-person chess event in St. Louis. The arbiter of this rule is FIDE, the international governing body of chess, but really it's also Magnus himself and chess.com because of the odd power structures involved in the story. The rule is fairly simple. It's that chess is a game that takes place entirely within your own brain, and you cannot have any outside assistance in making your moves. Getting outside assistance is now very easy because you or I or anyone with access to the internet can instantly interface with a chess engine that could make the correct move in any possible scenario, which sort of shows what the stakes of this scandal are, is that the sanctity of chess relies upon that sort of internal secrecy, and if you're getting any sort of help, then the entire game falls apart. It's a game that cannot withstand even the tiniest bit of cheating because it is so easy. Is that 60 seconds?
Ding,
Did we
ding,
do it?
Ding! That was
Wow.
1 minute and 11 seconds, so you made it. Good job.
Rounded to the nearest minute, that's 60 seconds. Perfect. Let's introduce our main characters, starting with Magnus Carlsen. Magnus is the best chess player of all time. By 2022, he's already achieved the highest ranking ever, put together the longest unbeaten streak in classical chess history, and has been the world champion for a decade. And he was only 31. The thing that makes him special is his world-class memory. There's this YouTube video where another grandmaster shows him positions on the board and asks him which game they come from. Not only is he identifying games from as far back as the 1960 World Championships, he's able to recite the next 10 or so moves that take place after.
Now I'm going to play through an opening and stop me when you recognize the game, and if you can tell me who was playing black. in this one.
Okay, sure.
Okay. So I'm sure you've seen this opening before.
Okay, it's gonna be Anand.
Against?
Zapata.
What year?
87, 88, maybe?
88, yeah.
Yeah.
Magnus came up during the era where computer prep became the norm in chess. He has stayed one step ahead of his competitors by keeping his game unpredictable.
At the high level of super grandmasters, we're talking about 2 or 3 dozen guys who are on this constant circuit and knew each other inside and out.
This is Joshua Robinson of the Wall Street Journal. Josh is the journal's European sports correspondent, and he broke a huge part of this story.
And they just go around the world playing this game that they all learned as 3-year-olds at the highest level imaginable. And so while it seems stuffy, they're also, like any other group of, young men, they can be quite bitchy, and they're sniping at each other, and there are rivalries and there are friendships, and there's a lot of cabin fever there when they spend 5-6 hours playing every competition, locked in the same rooms, going crazy, and trying to pick out minute shifts in the balance of a match.
By 2022, Magnus is openly bored with chess, and he's already declared his intention to abdicate his world championship.
He's seeing the same faces all the time. He's playing in the same tournaments, and there are no more worlds for him to conquer. He is arguably the greatest chess player of all time, and you understand why he might feel bored. I think there's also questions of politics within chess that had just begun to irritate him. I think he saw the chess world also generally limiting his earning power, where there are so many other ways for him to market himself and just take control of the chess he's playing. So for all those reasons, I think he began to be frustrated with the way chess was run and the options in front of him.
If Carlsen is the epitome of the pre-COVID generation, this perfect computer whose game is smooth and featureless, Hans Niemann is the avatar of post-pandemic chess. He was one of the better youth players in the US by 2019, but he really popped off in 2020 and 2021 when he broke into the top 100. And he got there by playing a bunch of tournaments online, which wasn't possible before.
Where we started really paying attention to him was around that moment in Miami.
Can you explain the Miami moment?
Magnus and Hans played a casual game on the beach, and Hans beat him. But there's no real record of this game except a bunch of tweets from another grandmaster. And so we don't really know what happened there. But Hans is, like any player of that level, a prodigy. And you don't get to that level without a sort of genius level understanding of the game and putting in the work.
His style could best be described as instinctual. It's very different from Magnus. He likes to confuse his opponent by making these moves that seem counterintuitive. And somehow they work out in the end. He feels his way to the correct idea, often to brilliant effect. He is shockingly egomaniacal, and everyone in the game hates him. Just to give you a sense of his vibe, months before our story begins, in 2022, he gets his first win against Magnus. Afterwards, he walks off the stage, is approached by an interviewer, and gives an immortal quote.
Today, you start out with a masterpiece. How would you summarize it?
Chess speaks for itself.
Do you think Magnus sees any of himself in Hans?
I don't think Magnus would necessarily admit to seeing any similarities. There are some in the way they conduct themselves, refusing to be put in a box and be seen as these traditional chess players who can be a little bit reclusive. They're very studious, they're very introverted, and it doesn't take a lot to set them off because, they are in a high pressure environment, and it's not an environment that necessarily rewards rebels.
The tournament where the Carlsen-Niemann affair took place is called the Sinkfield Cup. It's one of the biggest tournaments in chess, and like most big tournaments, it's a high-pressure environment. During matches at Sinkfield, players sit opposite each other at small, dark wood tables in an overlit, windowless room. The walls and chairs are adorned with the St. Louis Chess Club logo. Everything has the antiseptic, overpressurized feel of a hospital or a small-time courtroom.
The setup is really kind of shocking. It's a literal fishbowl without water. The two players are sitting at a board behind one-way glass. So on the other side of the glass, you have a gallery, but the players can't see them. So there's a whole gallery of people sitting there watching people think.
Players sit silently across from each other with only a series of hovering cameras for company. It's less like a sporting venue and more like a submarine. I'm watching the matches on a YouTube stream featuring a cast of nervous-looking Grandmaster analysts pointing out possible lines and theoretical sequences. They do this over and over again, creating, analyzing, and discarding hundreds of scenarios, looking for any available micro advantage. This is what the players are doing too, but in their heads. Watching chess is like watching the placid surface of a shark-infested ocean. That outer calm is only matched by each player's silent mental processing. Anyone who cheats in a match betrays the game, but they also betray that perfect pressurized silence. To cheat in chess is to cheat oneself and one's opponent out of this beautiful, abstract dance. 10 of the best players in the world are invited to Syncfield every year. In 2022, the field includes Magnus, 8 other lesser superstar players, and Hans Niemann. All you need to know about the field is that each player is rated lower than Magnus and higher than Hans. In the third round, Hans surprises Magnus and beats him with the black pieces. And just like he did weeks earlier, Hans spikes the football. Hans gives an interview where he says, "It must be embarrassing for the world champion to lose to him." He says he feels bad for Magnus. He also says something very weird. He says that by some ridiculous miracle, he happened to have looked at an old Magnus game where he played the exact same position years earlier.
And Magnus wasn't thrilled about this. And he let it be known that he felt something was off about the way the result had gone.
Magnus responds in a very millennial way, by which I mean he posts a reaction GIF on Twitter. It's the classic Jose Mourinho quote where the famous manager says, "If I speak, I'm in big trouble." Then he drops out of the tournament. This is the moment where a chess story becomes essentially a gossip story. Magnus refuses to elaborate on his decision. Then the director of FIDE, the organization that runs chess, gives a cryptic remark where he says Magnus must have had a compelling reason. The trouble Magnus is referencing in this cryptic tweet is pretty clearly a defamation lawsuit. The compelling reason is pretty clearly that he thinks Hans is cheating.
And it's then, once you have this really explosive, like half allegation, you get the theories. And the theories were insane.
Anal beads. If you're enjoying this episode of Only If You Get Caught and you're wondering how you can support us, the best way to help the show is a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening right now. So, how does a chess player use anal beads to cheat? At the Grandmaster level, you don't need a super fine texture of detail to know which of the available possibilities on a chessboard is the best. So theoretically, if Hans could distinguish between 4 little signals in his butt, he could know which of the potential files or ranks or pieces he should move. Because at this level, the players know, okay, there are these 3 possible moves. I could protect this knight. I could attack his dark squared bishop. But the trick is knowing that you have to play these sequences out, 15, 20 moves into the future. And it's hard to tell if you'll be giving up or gaining an advantage. The computer knows, however. And so if you're just told which of the 5 seemingly similar possibilities is actually the best, you could pick up a pretty quick advantage there.
I think it's important to note that conclusively proving cheating in high-level chess is very, very difficult. It's not as if you and I sat down to a game and I secretly had my phone open and saw a move that neither of us had seen, and, that's enough for me to take a rook, and that's the end of that. At the highest level, where guys are, as measured by the computer, playing to a level of accuracy that's in the 90s, the only thing more powerful than the human brain is this incredibly powerful set of chess engines. They shift with very subtle moves in the middle game where suddenly, a grandmaster will say, oh, well, black is really controlling the dark squares now. And I look at this and I have no idea what he's talking about. But, that's when it is. And so because of that, the way chess cheating is measured by all this sophisticated software is by looking at how unlikely or likely it would be for a player to find the correct move in those very subtle middle games. And it's depending on how many standard deviations away you are from what a player with that rating would be expected to do.
So you're saying it's not a matter of just one move, basically. Like if someone was cheating against someone as good as Magnus, they would have to have some way to get the correct move on a sequence of, I don't know, a dozen moves or something.
And the difference between the right move and almost the right move is so small, but those things add up to decisive shifts in the balance. So conclusively proving that one move was assisted is very, very hard. So after that match goes down and Magnus makes it clear that he thinks there was something fishy about it, the story catches fire. And I'm not sure where it came from exactly, who was the first person to suggest that the way Hans allegedly cheated was by having some sort of device about his person.
That's a good euphemistic way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a family podcast. But we very quickly, the intimation that he had been receiving vibrating signals somewhere about his person through some sort of connected device that is not intended for chess, that caught fire. And you understand why.
That's probably a good one, right? An anal bead probably would beat the thing. I'm serious. If the engine,
With how desperate Hans is, that the anal bead theory is not even that far-fetched.
How do you disprove that you've used anal beads to cheat?
What is it about, you think, the reputation and world of chess that then makes the salaciousness of this theory stand out so much?
I mean, I think because chess is not the most approachable thing, right? It is constantly seen as this measure of intelligence, this measure of studiousness. So people don't have a way in when they see these chess geniuses competing and thinking for 5 or 6 hours, because there's nothing else to latch onto. It's just, this is the power of your brain. And so we imagine it as this ivory tower just full of a few dozen chess players who are constantly playing this incredibly complex thing. And suddenly we're like, hang on, this is not what we thought geniuses did. They're finding these really insane ways to cheat, allegedly.
Receiving the best move from a computer via anal beads is a pretty significant departure from old school chess culture. And there's still a tournament happening in St. Louis. After 2 more rounds of play, Hans gives an impassioned interview where he defends his honor and explains the ridiculous miracle slip-up. He also cops to cheating in an online tournament when he was 12, and then again 4 years later, simply to boost his ranking and get better online games. He also says that he will happily play nude to prove his innocence. At this point, things stabilize. Hans finishes Sinkfield in a respectable 6th place, and despite enhanced security protocols, nobody finds any evidence of cheating. Hans is in a strange place here. He hasn't been formally accused of anything, And yet, the biggest win of his young career has immediately been overshadowed by the most famous chess player in the world throwing a mysterious hissy fit. While Magnus and Hans are maneuvering around each other and saying as little as possible, the newly prominent online chess world is screaming about this story. 2 weeks of noise later, Hans and Magnus play another game. They meet at the Julius Bayer Generations Cup, which pits the best established players against the best young players. It's an online tournament, so unlike Sinkfield, the players are all in their own houses. Christopher Yu has an iPhone on a tripod behind him, filming his computer to prove he isn't cheating. Ramesh Babu Pragananda is playing with his forehead essentially inside his webcam. With his unmade bed in the background, Magnus looks disheveled and uncomfortable. He looks like he's digesting a big hamburger. The whole world is watching. Magnus plays one move, turns off his webcam, and resigns in protest. This is a very funny and very pissy way to make your point. It also emphasizes how much chess has changed. Here is the exemplar of the old world speaking the language of today's post-revolution chess. What Magnus is doing here is forcing Hans to defend himself without being exposed to any risk. That's just what a good attacking chess player does. But a lot of the chess world is annoyed with Magnus for being too passive-aggressive. He's torturing poor Hans, leaving him in limbo. Days after the resignation, Magnus finally makes his case. He accuses Hans of cheating, both over the board at Sinkfield and online in several tournaments.
And so Andrew Beaton and I, using our various contacts in the chess world, get our hands on an internal report from chess.com about how they have previously disciplined Hans for cheating. And the report says that they had looked at hundreds of his games and found multiple occurrences of Hans cheating in games online. Until that point, Hans had admitted that he had cheated twice before, much earlier in his career in online games, and he said he regretted those and it had not happened again since. The Chess.com report contradicts that and says that it happened many, many times since, and it becomes very explosive because when we publish the story, it instantly goes around the chess world. Hikaru Nakamura, who is the American grandmaster, who is an extremely popular streamer, reads the piece live on a Twitch stream.
Wall Street Journal news exclusive. Chess investigation finds that U.S. grandmaster likely cheated more than 100 times. What? An internal report reviewed by the Wall Street Journal alleges a previously
And it was quite a surreal thing for us to put this story into the world and then see the world react to it in real time. But at that point, it's kind of the point of no return for the cheating allegations, and much of the chess world turns its back on Hans at that stage.
Can you explain, like, as an entity, why chess.com matters so much and the parts of their report that didn't cover cheating on their own platform?
So chess.com is a website that's been around for more than 2 decades and is one of the leading platforms where people play chess online. It really surged in popularity with the chess boom associated with the pandemic. And we saw their participation numbers go up in the millions. Their membership more than doubled. So much so that they had to do frantic work to replace servers and add servers. Even they were not prepared for this huge wave. But chess.com, because of this surge in interest and this huge surge in membership too, found itself with a lot of money on its hand. So put out more prize money, started organizing more prize money tournaments. And at the same time, the pandemic forced a lot of the chess ecosystem to move online, where they found new ways to prevent cheating. So all of that contributed to a kind of new world for chess, where they could actually play high-level prize money tournaments online. And chess.com filled a lot of that space.
They have been the organization who has gained the most from the chess boom. Most people who started playing online in 2020 did so on chess.com, myself included. While the Hans Magnus story was breaking, they were also in advanced talks to acquire Magnus's Play Magnus group, which they eventually did for $83 million in December 2022. The most interesting thing about the report, then, is not really what it says. It's their vested interest in supporting Magnus's side of the story. Imagine you got into a dispute with someone at the local dog park and woke up the next day to discover that Chewy.com had published a dossier listing all the times you failed to pick up after your dog. That doesn't nullify the report, though it does explain why it's so weird. Now, the clearest revelation in the report is that Hans cheated a ton on their platform, including in several tournaments, and as recently as 2020. That's when his meteoric rise to the top of the sport began. I remember sending you a Twitter DM asking for a copy of it, and you were like, very politely, no. But then, like, reading the report, seeing they have all these emails from Hans where he's like, yes, I cheated. Can I please have my account back? It seemed pretty open and shut.
Yeah, he had been disciplined by chess.com and at different points banned, reinstated, and which is the way chess.com handles these. You know, chess.com has to be its own police and, you know, hires very expert people with PhDs in computer science to run these things.
Chess.com measures the accuracy of a player's moves against what the engine recommends. Anyone making a prolonged series of perfect moves is probably cheating, or at least warrants further scrutiny. Players in online tournaments have their webcams and computer activity monitored. Chess.com's analysts found that Hans's performance was better when he was toggling between windows. Even if that alone doesn't prove cheating, it's a pretty big red flag. But the bulk of the report has nothing to do with Hans cheating online. You would maybe assume that a chess.com dossier would concern itself more with URL than IRL, but no. Their report spends a lot of time on the possibility of Hans cheating over the board. This is both impossible for them to prove and fundamentally not their problem. Yet they lay out sheets of circumstantial evidence expressing skepticism in the legitimacy of his rise. The irony is that Hans, who probably didn't cheat at Sinkfield, may have only been able to get to Sinkfield in the first place because he cheated his way through a bunch of online tournaments. Hans responds to the report by filing a $100 million lawsuit against Magnus, Chess.com, and the streamer Hikaru Nakamura. That's who we heard reading Josh's story earlier. He spread a lot of the biggest and most inflammatory cheating theories early on.
I don't think we're ever going to know if he really cheated at Sinkfield. I mean, the best we still have is Magnus's word against Hans's word. And because it is so difficult to prove definitively whether any of these moves were assisted, it's impossible to tell. That said, I think the fallout certainly has shifted and shaped Hans's career since then, and it's also changed the chess world, where we saw a ramp up in security measures and detection measures around major events, where everyone gets wanded now coming in. They also have various devices now that check for communications frequencies and things like that. So it's very, very hard to cheat in modern chess now. So it's hard to say definitively one way or the other whether the cheating occurred in that match against Magnus. We know cheating occurred before online because Hans has admitted that. But what happened between the two of them, only Hans knows.
They settled the lawsuit. But years later, the conflict at the heart of the matter hasn't truly been resolved. In Magnus's statement around the settlement, he said, "I acknowledge and understand Chess.com's report, including its statement that there is no determinative evidence that Hans cheated in his game against me at the Sinkfield Cup. I am willing to play Niemann in future events, should we be paired together." That is a really frosty statement. Years later, Magnus is basically back where he started, convinced Hans cheated against him, but unable to prove it or even say so outright. Personally, I don't think he did. What makes it such an interesting story is that each protagonist presents a wildly different, mutually exclusive version of reality, one that each party is fully convinced of. The viewing public is much larger than it would have been just 2 years earlier, making them uniquely primed to misread the story in big, critical ways. The biggest entity in chess throwing its weight around in an ethically suspect way only made things worse. Competing at the very highest level in any context takes equal amounts of talent, in irrational self-belief. In chess, there are no teammates or field conditions or officials to blame when things don't go your way. It's direct mind-to-mind combat. Losing can be read as a personal failure. This is why cheating is so venomously disavowed, but also why it's so clearly incentivized, especially now when it's so easy. Much has been made over the centuries about the price of genius, and chess is the arena where this trope most directly plays out. It's good for the game when the fun, interesting aspects of chess get tons of attention, but that's not possible without the darker side also coming to the fore. Hans Niemann is a new sort of player and a new sort of odd public figure, but he is of a familiar archetype. The punchline to this story is that for all the legal battles and outrageous public conduct, basically nothing happened. Magnus is still the best player in the world, and Hans is still striving. The biggest change either man has made is that Hans is now a prolific YouTube guy. What an ending for a player whose defining trait is his megalomaniacal determination to rise and win and become famous. In the end, he got what he wanted, but it was a Faustian bargain. The point here is not that cheating tainted his soul or anything so gothic. His mistake was seeing the border between chess worlds as more porous than it actually was. I always come back to his oft-repeated quote, "Chess speaks for itself." He's right. It's just that chess is multilingual now.
Only If You Get Caught is written and hosted by me, Patrick Redford. It's produced by Alex Sujong Laughlin, with production support from Jae Towle Vieira. Editorial support from Tom Lay and Audrey Mardavich. Justin Ellis is Defector's projects editor. Mixing by Samantha Gattsek. Show art by Jim Cooke. Jasper, Wang, and Sean Kuhn are Defector's business guys. Thank you to the Defector staff. Defector Media is a collectively owned, subscriber-based media company. Only If You Get Caught is a proud member of Radiotopia.